Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and once again, I welcome everyone. I think you'll all agree with me that we are all very lucky to have Cantor Fishman and this wonderful, wonderful choir with us under the direction today of Tomer Adadi and Toda Rabba. I want to use this time, and perhaps it's a little selfish, but I need to use this time, actually, to express some of the pain of this past week. It was both personal pain and communal pain. It was the pain of so many members of our congregation. And try to, through that expression, forge some kind of meaning, create some kind of a framework that I know is essentially a framework that our tradition tries to impose upon us during difficult times and actually during good times also, so permit me. I know that you hear of sermons, you hear of drashot and divrei Torah and speeches. In some ways, they're all a little bit of a different type of presentation that's given at a time like this. This morning, what I want to refer to this as a kavanah. Kavanah is most popularly known as spiritual direction. We have kavanah when we are focused and feel in a deep, heartfelt way a prayer, for example. But my words this morning are flowing from my heart after a very challenging period with members of our congregation and with friends. A very difficult week, a week where death was too prevalent. With many members of this congregation, I have gone through this very difficult time, for we have been sitting with the dying and with the dead, and we've been at funerals together and shivas together. I have been a rabbi for 40 years. And in my 40 years, I have never experienced a week with this kind of intensity because of the numbers of people who died and the connections, the love and the friendship that is shared with each of them. When I was a young rabbi, I believed that when I had become an old rabbi, like after 40 years in the rabbinate, some of these things would be easier for me, but they're not. It's because of the nature of the relationships which develop and deepen. And so I share with you that in a little bit more than a week, I have sat with a 90-year-old woman as she was dying. I recited the Vidui with her. She was completely conscious. She was originally from Hungary. She was a woman who was a model of resilience and love, and the capacity to survive and rebuild a life after the atrocities of Europe. A wonderful woman with a wonderful family. And I've known her for 30 years, and we sat together, I held her hand, we spoke. She smiled and passed away about an hour later. I sat with a couple a few days later at a cemetery who reinterred a baby that was born years ago. The baby was a stillborn who was taken quickly from the mother and buried, and she was not able to participate in the ritual. And so we decided to reinter the baby so that the baby would be brought from Virginia here. And it was an opportunity to pray. It was an opportunity to reflect on life and love and lost possibilities. And it was a moment of family reconciliation. We spoke about shattered dreams and newborn hope. 2 weeks previous, she became a grandmother for the first time. And so many of us mourned together in the sanctuary this week. The death of a 67-year-old woman who had just become a grandmother for the second time. A lovely, lovely, kind woman. I had the privilege to do a baby naming in her room with her loved ones. gathered by, her 91-year-old mother sitting next to her, hospice workers in the room, her sister lying next to her, her husband massaging her feet, her new granddaughter and her daughter and son-in-law. And she gathered enough strength to smile and to say, "Thank you, Rabbi." And then we recited the Vidui together as she drifted into the next world. For weeks, no, for years and years, I have prayed here. I've prayed with a family and with a community that has worked so hard to support the struggle of a 37-year-old woman, a beautiful, powerful soul, a mother of a 7-year-old, a wife, a sister, a daughter, a niece, a friend to so many. And after her second lung transplant last Thursday night, she passed away this past Motzei Shabbat. A family and an entire community of friends stood together, looking for comfort and trying to comfort each other in memory and with hope and with the strength that she gave everybody throughout her life. And then Wednesday, I was gathered here with a son as we held a memorial service for a 104-year-old man, a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, a friend, an extraordinary man, a philanthropist, and truly a scholar. And I know by being together, we brought comfort and brought comfort to this man. With each of these people, in each of these situations, I know I could talk about them and share information and inspiration with you and go on for hours. But rather, I would like to reflect on something else that I've been sitting with throughout this entire time. Because I've held each one of these losses in my heart and in my spirit. I know that the dead will always reside in the hearts of their loved ones. That I know and that I could see. A baby, a young mother, a young grandmother, a matriarch for a family, and a patriarch in a community. So they range in age from a newborn, not even a newborn, prenatal, to 104, almost 105 years old. And I asked myself, could they hold anything in common? Is there some kind of a unifying message in that? Or what did I learn? I guess it's clear that each situation was so very different. Each person, even the infant, taught survivors so much. I know that each and every family, as each and every individual, mourns differently, suffers in a different way, and yet there is a commonality in loss and in suffering. For all, loss is terribly painful. But it does connect us to others who have suffered the deaths of loved ones. Death brings us to understand what others suffer from. Death connects a bond between people. There's also a certain commonality when our worlds are turned upside down. For death creates chaos, and then what I see is that family and a tradition helps to create some order out of that chaos. Certainly in the experience of sadness and loss in the end of an earthly relationship, even when causes of death were each unique and the ages were so different, there's something that ties them all together. It may simply be that we're human beings. And as human beings, we are born and we die. I do know that death after a long life can be beautiful. We gain perspectives that's very different. Gratitude is much easier to find. Acceptance can be found. But the death of the young leave us baffled. the death of the young leave us in chaos. Questioning the meaning and the truth of long-held beliefs and long-held assumptions as to what we should be believing. In the beginning of every funeral, we invoke the name of God. Perhaps we do so because we realize that we do not have full control. We recognize that we're part of this vast created universe. And by virtue of that, there will be birth and there will be death. We, like life itself, come and we will go. And such is the world we are in. We control some stuff. We control a lot of things, but so much is beyond us. And this week emphasized to me the rather random nature of life and death, the stuff that's way beyond us. The rabbis taught olam kiminhago noheg. The world has a way of being, and that's the world that we're in. There is no control. It's in that randomness that we try to find a way to meaning. We try to find our way to comfort and give comfort. We try to find our way to acceptance. I can find some of that meaning, comfort, and acceptance when I consider the part of the world where we do have some control, because it's not all lost. It's not all given up. There is a world where what you do matters, what we do matters. And so although I witnessed so much there was no control over, I also witnessed incredible responses from people. I saw hundreds of people gather at funerals. I saw the decisions that people made. I know that in this world we do have some agency. We do make a difference if we want to make a difference. I saw this week how people do so. I witnessed the power of love, a power that can transcend our time on earth, a power that remains beyond us and within us and gives us strength and sustains us. This happens when people are willing to go beyond themselves. It happens when people reach out towards others. And I also once again witnessed the power of community, the force of the relationships that tie us together and strengthen us, the power of shared grief that binds us together. I saw in many of these deaths the power of babies and little children also, both working as a distraction to grandparents and parents, but also giving reason to continue to live. And so I did witness healing too. I know that the healing will never be totally complete. I know that all of us who have ever experienced death live with broken hearts. But it's our job to be amongst those who heal. We are to be amongst the healers, the lovers, and the peacemakers. And that's not always found when we give it over to a higher power, but it's found in taking over. It's found in taking ownership, knowing what we have to do to improve lives and to improve the situation and to make situations better whenever we can make them better, even a little better. We do it first and foremost with our presence, and typically it is silent presence that's called for. I'm going to pivot now from talking about the immediate experience. I'm going to talk a little bit about our people and the celebration that's coming up and what we learn from that and how it informs what I've just spoken about. I don't listen to many podcasts. I listen to one. I listen to Daniel Hartman's podcast. On the podcast this week, the scholar Rabbi Steinhardt pointed out that Hanukkah is a Civil War story. It's really not about God's miracles. It is about how we do things and how we make things happen and how we can imprint meaning. During the times of the Maccabees, there was terrible violence, and it was ugly violence, and it was primarily Jews versus Jews. I think we kind of hide that part of the story instead of creating, so that we could create a narrative that would unite our people. Anyway, Alana goes on and she quotes from Proverbs. She says the following, and I found it to be so beautiful. As face answers to face in the water, so does one person's heart to another. I'm going to read it again. As face answers to face in water, so does one person's heart to another. The Midrash asks, what does that mean? And they say, we see that when we look into water, we see a reflection of a face that is just like ours. It is ours. But similarly, when we look at another person's face, there's also a reflection of our own. And so, if we look at another person with disdain or think that they are ugly, when we look at people with anger and animosity, that's how they look at us. When we look at another person with kindness and empathy, that's the face they return to us. And the cycle continues. In the Talmud, we learn that anyone who has the capability to protest when evil is happening and doesn't, they share in the responsibility for the sinful conduct. What we see is that throughout our tradition, there's a very strong voice that doesn't speak to faith, but rather speaks to our behavior in any particular situation, to our reactions, to our responses to what's happening in the world, or what might be happening to the person that we're looking at, the person that we're facing. Interpersonal behaviors are so important. And the acts that we do in relation, in response to this world, is everything. The Torah tells us we can never stand idly by. Vayeshev is the parsha we read today. And it means, and he settled. And perhaps in its original intent, before the story goes on, there was a sense that Yaakov was now old, he could finally settle down, and he could take it easy. And what we see is that he can't settle down. And that all sorts of stuff, some really bad stuff, continues to happen, including thinking his son was killed and ultimately being separated from his son for decades. It's a tragic story. There was no ability to settle down. And I think it's a type of metaphor for life. We think we can settle down. We think we can coast for a while. We think things might be easier. We hope that we'll have a period of good health, but we never know. There are things that we have no control, and we say it over and again, and yet there's stuff that we do control. There's stuff whereby we make a difference. We have the capacity to change a life, and we have the capacity to change the world. And that's what religion should be focusing on. What can we do? How do we look at other people? What kind of a face do we present? How do we present ourselves to those with whom we disagree, sometimes virulently? How do we present ourselves to the world when we don't like its direction? And this is emphasized on Hanukkah. So we can speak of the revolt and the courage, but I do want to go to the mystery of the candles, of the light. I've written about this a few times. And I wonder about it regularly, especially. I'll wonder about it tomorrow night as we light the first candle. Why is it a miracle of 8 nights? The lights burned for 8 nights, you'll say. But there was enough oil to begin with for 1 night. So surely the first night wasn't the miracle. It was the next 7 nights. So it's not a miracle of 8 nights, it's a miracle of 7 nights, and we do something. We take agency that first night. And that's the answer. It was the very fact of lighting the fire. That very act was an act of hope. It was an act which said, I believe in the future. It was an act that said the world can be better, that I can bring light if I want to bring light, and that light is going to make a difference. The miracle was in human will. The miracle was ours because we made the effort not to give up, but to continue to light. We bring a little bit of light whenever we choose to dispel the darkness, and that's what I saw all week long. I saw people bringing that light. I saw people bringing the light that's inside of them. They brought their love. They brought their sense of connection. They brought their hearts. They brought their hope that they could bring comfort to each other. And you know what? Some of the gloom was dispelled. Some of the sadness was lifted. Some of it will always remain. Life is that way. But we can improve it. We make it a little better. Today we hear so many conversations about the people on the other side who believe this, who hold this position. We hear so much being said about disasters, the disasters we're facing. There's so much conversation about anti-Semitism. There's so much conversation about fear in relation to Israel. And what I realize is that at the end of the day, the conversations pretty much go nowhere. We're going to move forward by virtue of what we're willing to do, the kind of changes that we are willing to make. It's about the face that we present to the face across the table. It's about letting go of fear. It's about the heart that we open to the heart in front of us. It's about using our hands and our feet to be in those places where we can make a difference. In its extreme, Hanukkah can be about a miracle performed by God, but then we miss something. And if we only think about the celebration of Hanukkah as a military victory, we're also missing something. It's our job to combine the spirit, the soul, and the capacity to work hard to lighten the burden of darkness from someone who is mourning, to lift up the life of someone who is suffering, to change the world and to bring love where there is so much hatred. And that's the place that after the last week and a half, I can find a little bit of comfort. This is the place that I was able to find a little bit of joy. It begins with lighting one light, and hopefully this Hanukkah will inspire us to see that each one of us makes a difference. As soon as we light a light, we dispel some darkness. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.